So we're going to start with watching a little movie. So, well, first, welcome. Thank you all for joining me during this brutal morning hour. Before I start, I would like to apologize myself beforehand because of the fact that on the following 90% of the slides, my own face is portrayed. And I just want to make sure that you guys know that I'm aware of that. But it's all in the interest of the story I would like to share with you this morning. I'm the guy of the jumper, the big blue jumper with the big white D, and the D stands for Dennis. And after my Bachelor of Performance Art at the Theatre Academy in Maastricht, I recently graduated from my Master of Fine Art at CreativeMornings in London. And I'm back in Netherlands, in Rotterdam to be precisely, where my studio is based. And I'm the art director of my own studio. And with my studio, I create crossovers between fashion, fine art, and performance art, using video, photography, and live performance. All my work evolves around the complexity of identity and the construction and deconstruction of it. With blurring the labels between my artistic and personal identity, I create playful procedures, and with humor and wit, I create hyper-aesthetic images. I'm not a theater maker anymore, and I've never been a fashion designer, and I do not really like to consider myself as a fine artist either. Studio Dennis Vanderbroeck is a place where a small team works together on international projects for both commercial and free purposes. Different art forms come together and where, whether commercial or free, all belong to the universe of Studio Dennis Vanderbroeck. This is a paragraph of my artisan statement, and it's in the very first sentence of this phrase where the essence of today's talk is displayed. Where does work stop and identity begins? And where does Dennis stops and Dennis Vanderbroeck begins? With adding the word studio to my name, I've tried to suggest something bigger than me and my identity. With adding the word studio, I suggest a physical place, the space of a studio. So less Marina Abramovic and more like our Marina Abramovic Institute. Followed by a place where a small team works together, suggesting that more individuals are working collaboratively in my studio, less Andy Warhol and more like his factory. To be very clear, until this point, I'm the only one working in that physical studio. And some people may call this bragging, hello, or just vanity, whereas I tend to think that besides it being clever from a business perspective, the idea of branding is an extremely intriguing tendency. Today, I would like to talk to you about the history of this blue jumper, and more important, how this blue jumper made me become the victim of my own research. Before we really get started, the price of a Dennis jumper is 20 euros. To present the jumper as a functional fashion commodity instead of a piece of art. The number of jumpers produced is unlimited in order to take away the exclusivity. And the jumper comes only in one size, my size. You can order it via my website, www.dennisvanderbroeck.com. This is how the blue trip started. During an artist in residency in the summer of 2014 in Italy, I created a performance entitled "This Selfie Should Justify My Existence." A performance in where I was trying to fight my right to exist, both as an individual and as an artist. And the audience witnessed a playful procedure where three similar-looking, tall, skinny, dark-haired men constructed a flag. A gigantic flag made out of 18 jumpers, with the letters of my name stitched on them. Planting a flag that was screaming my name. Fascinated by the pop culture in fashion and fine art, the celebritization of it, and the notion of the mythical identity of the artist over time, a research started to evolve on how to mythologize myself, and therefore how to construct a brand with myself as the subject. Really, this fascination started with the obvious Andy Warhol, I named him before. Probably the best example of where the identity of the artist and its bodies of work are inseparable from each other. The best example concerning the notion of the artist as a celebrity and therefore the commercial branding of one's practice. How Warhol's self-created second identity boosted the status of his work and the other way around. How his identity and appearance became performance, and how his appearance in the scene became as important as his day-to-day art producing activities. Every social gathering was used to exhibit his carefully constructed second identity. Therefore, it became impossible to divide the line between his public performance and work. One can argue that perhaps these second identities are the ultimate disguise to protect the personal identity, an argument that was also very relevant to my research. When playing "This Selfie Should Justify My Existence" in Italy, I started selling the blue jumpers used in the performance, a way of flirting with the phenomenon of merchandise, a way of selling performance art, and gesturing an element of fashion. With purchasing a jumper, I asked the purchaser to take a selfie with the jumper. Besides its self-marketing purposes, also an attempt to multiply my own identity. The 30 blue jumpers with the big white D, back then when they were still hand-stitched, I brought with me to Italy were sold within 2 days. Coming back from Italy, the jumpers started to spread themselves among my friends and acquaintances. We want to devote ourselves to art, so we don't need to go shopping, we don't need to cook. Everything is based on having a very simple lifestyle, including the tailoring. We don't have to change style every 3 years like the boys in the city do. Always the same style, very simple. We never wanted to be scrubby artists anyway, the so-called confidential artists. We go to the same restaurant every evening and have the same meal month in, month out, until we decide to change it. All of this is leaving time for work, to use our brain in a special way. in my opinion, a very interesting quote by the famous artist duo Gilbert and George in an interview they gave in 2012, I believe. Gilbert and George are known for their distinctly high formal appearance. They both always wear felt suits, and their large self-portrait based artworks. Gilbert and George and fashion designers such as Martin Margiela and obviously Karl Lagerfeld are all using their identity conceptually in relation to their work. Again, some may define this as superficial, but to me this perception on the character of the artist was extremely interesting, and slowly my own artistic identity started to evolve. A second identity that I could put on when attending important social gatherings or parties or openings, one that I could also initially take off again. This concept I obviously stole from Warhol. Every proper brand has a proper campaign. And then I asked two fashion photographers who happen to be friends to create an exact rip-off from a Gap campaign using the visual language known from the fashion industry. Only then with my jumper presented as a high-end fashion product, and only then with me as the face of the product. Slowly my personal and artistic identity started to merge. The difference between, on the one hand, Dennis, my so-called artistic identity, the boy in the blue jumper with the slick hair and the bored, lazy facial expression, and my personal identity, Dennis Vanderbroeck, they became more and more blurry. It was then when I realized that my artistic identity did not only subject my research anymore, it became my product. My self-created artistic identity became the core concern of my practice. And all of a sudden, the jumpers found their ways to my colleagues and to friends from France. And this almost obsessive urge for the artistic right to exist continued, and I came up with the concept of a project called the Deconstruction Collaborations, which is an ongoing project where I ask established fashion designers to deconstruct one of my D-jumpers. The idea of using the status of their brands and symbolically attach myself to it in order for my own brand to get taken seriously. This is really good. This is the last one, actually, from a London-based fashion designer. And then the weirdest thing happened. People who did not have any link with me started to request D-jumpers. In my dissertation, Who's Dennis? An Artistic Manual, I researched the tendency of the artist as a celebrity, something that seems quite frowned upon within the artistic landscape, although it is very happening. Branding yourself seems something that became inseparable from our generation, whether we like it or not, with the introduction and especially the influence of today's social media, justifying ourselves with sharing ourselves. And besides the idea of branding yourself and your practice, commercialism is a phenomenon that is not likable either in the artistic landscape. I absolutely love both of them. I'm extremely fascinated with the commercial side of art, which also explains my fascination for fashion, by the way. Because I create art for people and not only for myself. And I believe that branding does not mean that you're selling your soul to the devil. It should not give you a nasty taste, and one should not be afraid for branding. Do not get me wrong, I definitely not claim that it's the only option, but I would like to think that it should be considered as an option. And while writing my dissertation, I realized that I had become the victim of my own research. For my graduation piece, I had the idea to create a body of work where my artistic and personal identity would stand next to each other, unite them in order to be able to make the separation again. This resulted in a performative installation called Dennis for Sale, where I tried to focus on the shift between personal and private, between work and identity, between Dennis and Dennis Vanderbroeck. In a continuous performance, Dennis for Sale, Dennis Vanderbroeck displays a self-constructed second identity, Dennis. Seduced by this self-created second selfie, this piece is an attempt to unite Dennis Vanderbroeck with Dennis. With placing the artist artist on a pedestal, consistently rotating, Vanderbroeck is inviting his viewer to be his voyeur. With nothing to hide himself against, except the viewer's judge, he is asking to justify his right to exist, both as an artist and as an individual, both as Dennis Vanderbroeck and as Dennis. The character of the guard, consistently sitting next to the work, portrays another, perhaps contra-perception on the voyeur, the protected one, waiting for the moment where Dennis, the artist, fails to stay in character and becomes Dennis Vanderbroeck, waiting for the moment where personal becomes private. The semi-see-through polythene curtain with the taped phrase, "The artist failed to stay in character but will be back soon," blurs the view, separates the spaces and isolates the artists. Off stage. When Dennis Vanderbroeck decides to display Dennis again, the guard opens the curtains to start a new attempt. Dennis exists, there's not really a question about that. And with now having collected over 300 selfies from people all around the world, this project is still ongoing, and Dennis's existence can be considered as justified. Writing my dissertation and creating and performing Dennis for sale felt like the perfect conclusion of a 2 years research. With leaving London and moving back to Rotterdam, it also felt I left that chapter of that research behind. And then I was graduated, and I was living back in Rotterdam, and I was standing in my studio alone, surrounded by all the evidence of Dennis, and I had absolutely no clue of how to start a new chapter. But then, within the emptiness, I came up with the concept for a new project called Objects That May Look Like Humans, Making Statements About. Until this point, I did not yet fill in the gap after about, but there will be something. And that project is in a sense a project about Dennis, because it explores the use/abuse of humans as objects, how we became or made ourselves into objects. And besides this ongoing thematic research, the project will also be a research of my medium live performance and its context and documentation of it. How playing a live performance in a theater setting differs completely from playing exactly the same material in a gallery. How that shift of context changes the piece completely, or at least how people receive it. Besides that, I'm also interested in how video is often used in relation to performance art, sometimes used as a way of documentation and sometimes as a medium on itself. How video allows the artist the possibility to fully control the viewer's view, whereas controlling an audience perception seems impossible when performing live. I will create one body of work that I will translate into these two different media, a video and a live performance. And ideally, the audience would first see the video and directly after that the performance, a bit like an artistic find the differences. And with starting this project, I also realized that I did not leave Dennis in London. Dennis will always be with me because he became inseparable from me and my work. The big blue jumper with the big white D will always be present in my work, and I'm still continuing developing my brand. But I'll be a bit more careful now that I know better. And this was my presentation. Thank you.